This is The Allusionist, in which I, Helen Zaltzman, try to return language to where I bought it, but turns out there are no refunds. A while ago, I asked you for your language questions and etymology requests, and I put some of them to wise alumsionists. Then I got waylaid by Draculae and four-letter words and all sorts, but here we have their answers to some of your questions about petty linguistics and terms for yourself with regard to sexuality or what you eat. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question. There will be more. A couple of bits of news. 1, I make a tiny cameo in our pod pals Switched on Pop's new Netflix show. I pipe up to explain the etymology of chorus. 2, owing to the caprices of making a living as a professional podcaster in these times, for the first time in the show's nearly 12 years of existence, I have had to switch on dynamic ads, as they are known in the trade. That is the kind of ad that is not written and voiced by me, and I've always tried to be picky about which brands I've advertised on the show. For instance, I've never done pharmaceuticals, cars, gambling. An investment bank was once offering quite a lot of money for me to nice wash them. But with these dynamic ones now, I won't even know what the ads are for. So if you hear an ad for something and think, that would not pass the Zaltzman smell test, contact me via theallusionist.org/contact and I'll make sure that brand gets blocked. Thank you in advance for snitching. And if you would rather not hear the dynamic ads at all, and to be fair to you, they are annoying, then hop over to patreon.com/allusionist and donate at the tiers that are $5 or more per month, and you get an ad-free version of the show. If that means you actually miss me reciting URLs and offer codes, I'll make a fake ad for you for a product that's not real. Anyway, I don't love this, but I want the show to carry on existing, which requires the continuing appearance of money. So here is where we land for now. There is more explanation at theallusionist.org. And while you're there, hammer that donate button. Huge thanks if you've already done that. In return for donations at any level, you get bonus written content, regular live streams where I read relaxingly from my retro reference books, and membership of the Allusionist Discord community, which is a very sweet bunch of thoughtful people. theallusionist.org/donate for all that and to keep the Allusionist afloat. On with the show. A couple of episodes ago in Lingthusiasm, we got to hang out with linguist Lauren Gawne, co-host of the podcast Lingthusiasm, and here she is again. I had a question from a listener named Heather, Lauren, that I would like to put to you.
Okay.
Heather says, if you had the power to change one thing about the English language exclusively for low-stakes reasons, such as pettiness, vibes, or aesthetics, what would you change?
That is a great question, and I think if I had to change something in English, I would really just like to give the pronoun system a little bit of a zhuzh, because there's a thing that happens where we have a we form. We just have one we. We're going to go grab a coffee. And it's very hard in English to figure out if that includes you or not. Other languages have this solved. They have inclusive and exclusive we. And so they use a different form of we for we're getting coffee. All of us, you're included, you're coming along. It's implicit in that form. Or we're getting a coffee. You are obviously not coming because you've got a giant coffee in your hand right now. And I just think it could solve a lot of social interactional awkwardness if English fixed that particular part of the pronoun system.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of English pronounage that could use a significant overhaul. Listen to my episode called No Title for more about that. But I'm very happy to add we to that pile of chores.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the whole system is a bit of a mess, but I feel like this is if we're talking about
low stakes,
Heather's low stakes, pettiness.
Yep.
There's plenty of other bits that need to be fixed up for much more high stakes reasons.
Yeah.
But in terms of low stakes, just those moments of social awkwardness, then I think that's probably on the top of my candidate list.
Yeah, and for those of us who have rejection sensitivity and also just don't really want to impose on people where we're not explicitly invited like vampires, I think this is a very important conundrum that you've raised.
Yeah.
Alex Ketchum appeared on the episode Bread and Roses and Coffee, as well as Bonus 2025, talking about the heyday of feminist coffee houses and restaurants in the 1970s and 80s, and the language they used for themselves and their food. If you had the power to change one thing about the English language exclusively for low-stakes reasons such as pettiness, vibes, or aesthetics, what would you change?
Oh, okay. One thing. I think I would make it that society wouldn't be so judgmental about stalling words such as like or I think that we would have more social acceptance of those words and actually a regard to how they're built into different subcultures' vocabularies, and that it wasn't seen as something to be judged.
I feel like it's very you to use your vote for the greater good.
Thanks. I think there's also a bit of selfishness too when I've listened back to recordings that I'm thinking, oh no, I'm saying like every fifth word when I'm trying to think of something. And I had a former professor who anytime I used the word like, she said stop and made me say it again. And I had taken it out of my vocabulary. But as I've relaxed back into myself a bit more as a human being, I've noticed the resurgence. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's just a thing.
It's very useful, especially for reported speech. I haven't figured out a replacement in that context. So I'm going with it, I suppose.
Yes. So I guess that's my vote.
Let us have words while our brain is buying time.
Exactly. You can't always take a sip of water.
My dad was a very funny man. And he had quite a laid-back delivery. And sometimes he would do a sort of musical humming sound while he was thinking of a punchline. So he'd do the setup and then be like, and then bam.
Okay, I like that technique.
Yeah, that's an option. Lexicographer and writer Kory Stamper appeared on the Hughes episode of the show this year to talk about how difficult it is to define colours in dictionaries. I put Heather's question to her too.
What would I change? I think I would require the use of moist more often. I would create compound adjectives out of moist. So we've got moistful or moisty. I would resurrect the verb moistify.
Wow.
Mostly because I think that's one of those words, right? You say, oh, I write dictionaries. And people go, oh. And then they immediately tell you all the words they hate. Oh. And moist is always at the top of the list. Oh, I hate moist. It's so gross. And like, if you want to go find the studies that have been written on why people don't like the combination of sounds that result in the word moist, you can. But I just think like, sometimes moist is the word you need to use. And so just to be petty, I would just make it a more prominent word. I would make it more word, more moist.
Perfect.
Moistful.
Maybe that would help people confront their prejudices about moisture.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe it would just make people angrier. People would take up yoga more.
Well, you just simply can't control what makes people take up yoga.
That's true.
So moistitude could be it.
Ooh, moistitude. Oh, lovely. All right, I'll add that to the list.
Yeah, you've got the power.
Yeah, let's do it.
Lauren Gawne had another answer to Heather's question.
The other one that's probably high on my list would be that English speakers are not very good at marking where information has come from.
What, like footnotes?
Essentially. So the Tibetan languages that I work with have a system called evidentiality of marking where you know something from. And so you have to distinguish between, in these languages, there's different ways of doing it in different languages. You have to distinguish between I saw it or I heard it directly. I know it just because it's long held information, or I know it because someone told me. And I just feel like it would be a lot easier to say, they're all going to get coffee. I saw them leave directly. Or they're all going to get coffee. Someone said. I don't know. I didn't see them go out with their reusable cups. Just someone else in the office told me they're going to get coffee. And again, I think a lot of the time I wish I knew whether someone was telling me gossip that they directly saw or that they're just reporting as like secondhand fact. I really feel like that would make my ability to judge the utility of that gossip a lot better.
I think you've got the makings of a detective drama featuring people from different language cultures navigating the misunderstandings arising from this lack in English specifically.
Yes, I do have to stress that people who speak languages that have grammatical evidentiality, which is like a quarter of the world's languages, appear to have this kind of marking in some form. So it's not like it's an obscure feature. It's just that those 25% are usually not in the more largely spoken languages. It's a very common phenomenon, but also I do have to stress for those of you who are immediately opening a blank Word document and starting this detective fiction.
Please.
I do have to stress that you can lie about the evidential status of something.
Okay.
So it's not like it's ungrammatical to use the wrong form. I have examples of this in the grammar. I have examples of this from my social life where people will just make up. I was at a wedding once and one of the ladies leaned over and was like, oh, yeah, she said she'll have alcohol. She'll have a drink. I was just like, I definitely did not say that. And you know that I normally don't drink. And you are absolutely putting words in my mouth. I mean, that is not at the level of like red herrings and a murder.
Well, it's a third act twist.
Yeah, it is absolutely possible to lie. There you go. You've already got it plotted out.
Oh, yeah, I'm excited for this.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you have an answer to that question.
Oh, my God. So many. You know what? I would just get rid of all, I mean, it's not really petty or vibes or aesthetics. I would just make all the language gender neutral. So like one pronoun, get rid of titles. But I've been on that horse for years.
Yeah, that would definitely simplify things.
And I think also I would get rid of the two different spellings of practice and practice. I think we should just choose a C or an S and free up that little bit of brain space where we're like, which one do I use?
Yeah. Yeah, spelling differences.
Yeah, minor spelling differences.
Yeah.
I have a lot more answers to Heather's question, but let's not get bogged down with my gripes. On to more pressing linguistic matters. Among the things Alex Ketchum's academic work focuses on are queerness and food, so I sought her opinions on both. Here is a question from someone who says, my sister is bi or pan, but has received pushback for using each of those terms in different situations. People say things like, calling yourself bi is transphobic. She is also trans and considers trans folk, non-binary folk, etc. eligible partners. They also say, calling yourself pan is biphobic or bi-erasure. Bi is all-inclusive. Now she feels genuinely scared to tell anybody either of those things and really just wants to communicate and feels like whichever one she uses is going to be misunderstood and used against her. I know this is an area where the language is in flux, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry that your sibling has experienced pushback and hostility about the language that she's choosing to use for herself. There's kind of a joke about the difference between bisexuality and pansexuality is your feeling about the color yellow because of the flags. There's a lot of similarities in terms of the flags. And as someone who identifies both as bisexual and pansexual, I understand the difficulty of navigating these terms. Terminology within queer communities is ever shifting, and also the way that people relate to certain terminology can be really personal. There's not actually just one straightforward answer of how there's a difference between bisexuality and pansexuality. For listeners who are unaware of kind of the debate around this, some folks say that bisexuality implies that there's only two genders and is really reliant on the gender binary, and that it erases non-binary identities. And some people would argue that bisexuality isn't speaking about love or attraction towards men and women, but rather same and different. So that becomes the more like kind of trans-inclusive understanding of bisexuality. Pansexuality is about attraction to people of all genders. Sometimes people will also come up with the differentiation that one is attraction to both in kind of an inclusive of same and different, that would be bisexuality. And pansexuality sometimes is defined of attraction regardless of gender. So there are subtle differences here, but not everyone totally believes in all of these differences because they can be so particular to different sub-communities within the queer community and specific to time and geography. And I think it's important to use the terminology that you personally are comfortable with. For me, I feel more aligned with bisexual because it was the term that first made sense to me. I hadn't even heard of pansexual when I was 17 years old. Sometimes we have these personal ties to the phrases. I think that's why a lot of people are also drawn to the word queer instead because of its umbrella category, but there's also feelings of reluctance to use that term as well due to its history. So I'm sorry that your sibling is experiencing pushback, and I hope she feels supported in using the terms that work for her.
Do you have experience of people having similar responses to you where they are disagreeing with you about the terminology that you prefer for yourself? And if so, what is your rejoinder to them?
Yeah, I don't feel like I've ever had someone call me out of saying bisexual or pansexual, probably because I always am like, I use both and I also use queer.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so get ahead of it.
Yeah, exactly. But I also sometimes see more of the pushback actually in internet spaces and the comments on Instagram and how people are reacting to that. The place where I actually see more of the pushback is not just in internet spaces, is just about the existence of bisexuals at all. No. So I feel the kind of biphobia is really the more place where I see hostility, both from straight communities, but also queer communities. So that can be the place where there's more of the like, oh, bi women or traitors. I don't want to like repeat all of these like terrible stereotypes and stuff. I don't want to like re-ingrain them, but there's a lot of harmful discourse about bi people of all genders and a lot of different stereotypes. So that's where I see it more. And so that's why maybe also some people can be drawn to the term pansexual, because if they're not feeling as aligned with the term bisexual, maybe it's not as triggering when they see all of this biphobic rhetoric online, perhaps. That could also be another thing. But, you know, terms are flexible. We use them in a lot of ways. As this podcast is always talking about, language is complicated. And, right, identity is complicated. Shifting understandings of gender and sexuality make language complicated. So I think we'll continue to see a flux around these terms.
Several years ago now, I made that episode 2 or more about 70 years of the word bisexual. As a term, it has just never had an easy time.
Exactly. Yeah, it's constantly contested, even though bisexuals are the largest category of queer people, like within the LGBTQ community.
So if you ever unionize, then...
maybe we'll have more of a vote.
Yeah. Okay, maybe that's the move.
We shall see, yeah.
I know for a lot of you, your happy place is the podcast Home Cooking, hosted by Hrishikesh Hirway and Samin Nosrat. Is Hrishi the alumsionist who has made the most appearances on the show so far? Well, here he notches up another one. Hrishi, Samin, welcome back to The Allusionist.
Thank you so much. So happy to be back.
Thank you so much for having us, except I'm sure you're going to feel sorry about it in just a moment.
Well, it'll probably be my fault because last time you were on Samin, I angered you. So anything could happen.
I've completely blocked it out.
Okay, that's probably because of the rage. Just remove the blood supply to your head eventually. Listen to Bonus 2021 to hear about how I made Samin sputter with my salad preferences. And for more food chat, listen to Hrishi and Samin on the food quiz episode. I've had this question from Jake, who says, I have a need for a word. I choose to limit the amount of meat I eat for environmental reasons. I am not a vegetarian. I am seeking to reduce consumption rather than end any consumption. Specifically, I don't buy meat at the grocery store, except for special occasions. If I go out to eat, I sometimes order meat. Looking around at how I, as an individual, can contribute least to climate change is to drive less and eat less meat. That is what I'm going for. We might say that no word is needed because eating less meat is still cruel or still too much of a burden to the planet, so I should just go full-time vegetarian. But in the meantime, what do we call people who save meat eating for special occasions because of environmental reasons? Ecotarian?
I like ecotarian.
You answered your own question, Jake, but then you probably have to explain what it is to someone. Where if you said I'm ecotarian, they'd be like, okay, well, I'll cook you chicken.
I find that you can't get around the question really anyway. There's always a conversation when you ask somebody about their
dietary restrictions.
People can say, oh, I'm a carnivore, but also I can't eat this thing or I can't eat that, So I think ecotarian works because you're going to have follow-up questions regardless.
You guys, there's already a word for this.
What's that?
It's called a flexitarian. Look up the definition. A flexitarian diet, also called a semi-vegetarian diet, is one that is centered on plant foods with limited or occasional inclusion of meat. Usually for flexibility and sustainability reasons.
Interesting.
Like, it's literally everything he's asking for.
Sometimes the gift is already in front of us and it just took Samin Nosrat to wrap it up and put it on the table.
I'd suggest an alternative to flexitarian because he's really close to being a vegetarian. He's just there. I would say he's an edgetarian.
Edgetarian.
I was doing what Jake is doing for some time.
Emailing podcasts?
Absolutely never would. But for a long time, I was eating meat once or twice a month, and now I don't eat meat. But for that time, a small lie was quite useful because I wanted to eat the meat that I chose, which was basically when I went for dim sum, and not the meat that people would cook for me because they don't know how to cook vegetables. So my solution is lies.
Yeah, I like that solution a lot.
How about carne of either or?
Oh no.
I tried. So my wife Lindsay is vegan, and because of that, I eat mostly vegan just by default, and I support all of the reasons why she is a vegan. And so I tried floating this term to her, which is that I'm vegan 80% of the time. I'm 80% vegan. I'm Vega, which is 80% of the word vegan. And she had a similar reaction to this stunned silence of appreciation that I'm getting from the two of you.
Yeah, that's what this is, yeah.
We're both shaking our heads vigorously.
In agreement.
With
right?
appreciation and approval. Yes, the breeze of approval has caught our heads.
You're not a Vega.
Okay.
Could be a Veen.
A Veen I like.
I remember when I met Hrishi, actually, you did say that you were vegetarian, except you did make an exception pretty much every Friday to eat a fried chicken sandwich.
Oh, that's right.
I was going to say fried chicken
Fried
sandwiches.
chicken Fridays.
He's a vegan who eats fried chicken sandwiches. Like, that's literally the main thing I see you break it for.
Yes. And the advent of the vegetarian fried chicken sandwich was just the greatest thing for me.
Anytime I've tried to stick to anything, it has failed so miserably. Like, so miserably.
Like what? When you were like, I'm just going to drink blood?
Yeah, like first I decided I was going to be a vampire. Then I decided I was going to be a daytime vegan. And I told press about it.
Oh, that's right. The Jonathan Safran Foer vegan until sunset?
I was like, oh yeah, I'll just be a daytime vegan and nighttime. And it's not even that I want to eat meat. It's more that I just want to drink milk and eat cheese.
I thought you were really going to go back to, it's just that I want to drink blood.
And eat blood cheese.
Blood cheese, totally.
Maybe flexitarian is the perfect word for you, Samin, but
Maybe.
just because it allows doing whatever you didn't do yesterday.
It's true. Or like, is there just like indecisivarian?
I don't know.
We'll come back to it.
Or will we?
Or will we? I'm holding on to carne of either or, even if no one else is.
Flexitarian was the American Dialect Society's pick for most useful word of the year in 2003. So hold on tight for carne of either or to top the list any year now. I also put the same question from Jake to Alex Ketchum.
I feel like flexitarian speaks a little bit more to the intentionality rather than the folks who call themselves omnivores, because the folks who call themselves omnivores, at least my own personal connotation with it, maybe this isn't the case for others, but is that there's a bit more meat on the menu than I would assume a flexitarian.
Jake says, the reason I want a word is because I am a teacher. I talk about my meat consumption or non-consumption more than I assume I would at work, were I not trying to model responsible behavior.
So I know you want a single term, but it's, of course, complicated.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, this is what I'm going to say for everything.
Well, I did give you the questions where there wasn't a one-word answer.
But Alicia Kennedy has this book, No Meat Required, and is kind of like unpacking ideas of vegetarianism and vegan identities and how a lot of times this has become like an identity that we put on ourselves. partly just because we need to signal to people what we can and can't eat, but also the terms themselves have flexibility. So in the 1970s, and a lot of kind of countercultural spaces, especially white-dominated countercultural spaces, vegetarian included fish. So, right, even our understandings of vegetarian shifts over time. I don't think there's exactly like one single term to speak to a reduced meat diet, but a lot of times people might say, I primarily eat plant-based meals, right? There's just a way to kind of indicate to others. And it's not saying like the emphasis on primarily doing something, you're indicating that that is where you're putting the emphasis. So, and I kind of like that framing because it decenters meat. So it's not that I'm eating less meat, it's that I'm eating more plants. And so that can shift some of that framing. But there's not a single term, though people, are playful with terms. And maybe you will term ecotarian. Why not? And then there's also lots of different types of, there's lacto-ovo vegetarians, there's a lot of variety there. So yeah, I think you can use a phrase like plant-based or plant-forward.
I think there's reasonable pushback on the term vegan being used by people who aren't vegan, because eating a fully plant-based meal sometimes does not make you a vegan. But then in food labeling, they can put plant-based on something that contains animal products. And that really messed with my head. That makes it a non-useful label to me.
Yeah, I think also like part of that distinction too has to do with, if you know Carol J. Adams' work about the sexual politics of meat and how meat is so tied to gender roles, and that like masculinity and meat consumption are so intertwined, and that some folks also would rather use plant-based as a term over vegan, even if there is this like miscategorization on labeling a product, because veganism can be linked to this idea of like femininity, or is tied to like not being strong or not these kind of toxic masculinity ideals. And so we kind of see this shift in terms of marketing towards that too.
So it's sort of like Diet Coke versus Coke Zero.
Exactly. Yeah.
I also find it a little complicated because I don't eat mammal or bird meat, but I do occasionally eat fish. But I tend to only really want to eat the fish when I choose it, occasionally.
So you don't like the term pescatarian?
I think it's more like, I feel like a liar when I say vegetarian, but I don't want to tell people I'm pescatarian because I don't really want them to feed me fish, which is not exactly very principled of me.
In this conversation, I'm thinking about the parallels with the bisexual, pansexual thing, because I also eat fish and have my whole life. I was raised eating fish, only fish, because my mom lived on a commune that had that kind of 1970s vegetarian ideal where vegetarianism included fish. So that's how I grew up. And so I'm just always say, I'm pescatarian and vegetarian, just like I do the bisexual, pansexual. I feel like I just kind of allow for that openness, and maybe that has assuaged a feeling of like hiding something, but it is this interesting thing that with our food preferences, how there is this way where it almost feels like we're confessing to something. It's not just a way of communicating what we need to eat and how we can kind of form community over eating, but there is almost this like, I don't want to take this too theoretically, but kind of Foucauldian nature of the confessional in a similar manner to how we have around our sexuality. So yeah, I hadn't previously thought of that parallel until this conversation in terms of, I don't want to undermine the experience of coming out because that is a different kind of experience, but I do see some parallels in how you're constantly coming out as like your own sexual orientation and gender identity, but also how you eat and these other choices and how that characterizes us in different ways and like our bodies. I'm going too far out with this from the original question.
That was Alex Ketchum. Her latest books are How to Organise Inclusive Events and Conferences and Queers at the Table, an illustrated guide to queer food with recipes. And because Alex never rests, you can pre-order her next book, Digital Queers and High-Tech Gays, The History of LGBTQ+ Cyber Activism. Lauren Gawne is a linguist, author of the book Gesture a Slim Guide, and the co-host of Lingthusiasm podcast, which has new zines and new merch featuring meat clarinet artwork, which is both more and less obscene than what you might be imagining. And you can hear her recent Allusionist appearance in Lingthusianist episode. Kory Stamper is a writer and lexicographer. Her latest book is True Colour, the strange and spectacular quest to define colour from azure to zinc. You can hear her talk about it in the Hues episode, and listen to her back in the Authority episode, talking about what it is to be a lexicographer, which is the subject of her excellent book, Word by Word. Hrishikesh Hirway and Samin Nosrat co-host the world's most charming podcast, Home Cooking, and they both do many other things. Hrishi's podcasts include Song Exploder, and he's a musician with a new album out, In the Last Hour of Light. Get it? Samin's latest book is Good Things. It will make you want to feed yourself and your favourite people, and it is a great one for flexitarians. I will link to everybody at theallusionist.org. Your randomly selected word from the dictionary today is fadge, noun, Australia/Aotearoa, New Zealand, a loose pack of wool containing less than a bale. Try using fadge in an email today. That's fadge, F-A-D-G-E. Fadge. This episode was produced by me, Helen Zaltzman, on the unceded ancestral and traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. The music is by Martin Austwick of palebirdmusic.com and the experimental podcast Neutrino Watch, and he's also part of my other podcast, Answer Me This, if you want to hear more questions being answered. There are literally thousands of questions being answered at answermethispodcast.com. You can listen to or read every episode and get more information about the topics and people therein. See photos of the full dictionary entries for the randomly selected words. Check out listings for events coming up. I think we're going to have a little social meetup in Vancouver mid-September. And become a member of the Allusionist to help keep this independent podcast going and get the ad-free version, all at the show's forever home, theallusionist.org.